All right, welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. And today I have a very special guest. I came across his art on Instagram and on a couple of Discord servers that I check regularly. And I was just really blown away by your art. And not only do you have amazing art, but you have your own podcast and you also offer some interesting looking courses. So I figured it'd be good to have you on today. As you're known, the little beast or the expanding beast, I think is your nickname.
the the average size beast,
Oh yeah,
the medium size.
yeah, the medium-sized beast. But yeah, can you introduce yourself and sort of how you got into esoteric and occult practice in general?
Sure. I read my first Aleister Crowley book when I was 14 years old. I got it. Probably I was influenced to pick up a copy by getting into the band Tool and through the symbolism in their music videos and hearsay that the band was into this kind of stuff. And I was just kind of really interested in it and fascinated by it. I think I've always had an interest in magic and the occult, even though Crowley was kind of probably my first exposure to, quote unquote, real magic. But when I was
Hmm.
a kid, I was always fascinated with fantasy books, and that was kind of like you know, the stimulus that got me at least curious about those kinds of phenomena.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of my first exposure to it. And then I also got quite into Buddhism. Eventually, that segued into me getting pretty heavily into the experimentation and use with psychedelics, which is its own form of occultism and has a lot of ties to occultism and the esoteric as well.
Hmm.
And shamanism of traditional cultures. So it's my I've done the whole kind of tour of spiritual traditions and lineages, and presently I find myself to kind of land back home where I started. I've been really interested in the Western mystery tradition and Western occultism, Selima, and things like that. But I see it all as kind of an emanation of the same thing. It's just different vocabulary to describe this sort of quintessential human experience that we're having, and these mystical experiences being one of the core human experiences, really.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of funny because Tool has definitely been a big gateway for a lot of people, including myself. Like, just if you look at their art, like they had a lot of Alex Gray art and just sort of even in their lyrics or like the album notes and everything, they have like the tree of life and all this sort of
Mm-hmm.
symbolism that, they sort of what would you say? They sort of like interlay little like hints and stuff here and there, for people to kind of catch on to if they look into it a little deeper, right? But yeah, it's interesting how Tool has really sort of kind of really opened the gateways for, including for myself, as I mentioned. So yeah, I mean, I was actually really blown away when I first saw some of your pieces because it's sort of like if you've ever been in a mystical or visionary space, it's like it's really trippy because I don't consider myself very artistic in the sense of like drawing pictures or in that way, definitely artistic in some other ways, but it really fascinates me when I see like an amazing uh artwork that it's like you can immediately recognize that like I've been there or that space is recognizable. And I'm really curious, like what's the process? Pretty complicated question, but what's the can you kind of share a little bit about the process of like bringing these visions into an artistic space into reality?
Well, to start, if you see my art and you think I've been there or that I'm capturing something that is recognizable that you've had from a mystical experience, then that's a good thing. That's what I'm trying to do,
Hmm.
you know. So it's good that that's how you feel when you look at my art. I would um well, the process that I generally it's like, do you want to get at it from like a philosophical side or do you want to get at it from like a technical side? On a technical level, I often have experiences. They can come about through psychedelic experiences. They can come about through rituals or ceremonies. They can come about through dreams. Sometimes they come about more spontaneously or more organically. Uh, and I try to capture that as quickly as possible. in the form of a little sketch or a little scribble, and then I will take that as a basis and I'll elaborate upon it. And my process is pretty lengthy nowadays. I generally spend quite a long time on my pieces, and it's a journey, each one. You know, they have their own journey, and I give them time and space to really come to form and to mature and to develop on their own time. You know, I guess philosophically, I am somebody who is primed for astral type experiences, and I always have been. So that's a natural talent or inclination that I have, and I understand that that's something that is distinct from a lot of people. And I have a lot of training in regards to artistic technique, and I see those both both as a kind of responsibility that I carry, because those are both rare talents, and so I attempt to unify them.
That's cool. Yeah, I know you teach some courses I saw on your website, and so I would imagine probably you go into further detail there for, people who are interested. Do you think that, like you mentioned, you're talking about the technical side as well as the visionary side, right? Do you think that, like, I think a lot of people consider themselves sort of a visionary type, but they don't really think that they have artistic talent. Do you think everyone has sort of at least some ability if they cultivate it to, they might not make amazing pieces like you, but do you think everyone has at least some sort of innate talent that they can cultivate if they want to, get into art?
I do, yeah, definitely. I think that the visionary quality and the technical ability to translate those visions is kind of like the right and left hand. You need both to be really balanced. I've met plenty of artists who are very gifted on the technical level, but they don't have the visionary capacity. And I've met many people on the other side of the fence. So it's kind of an unbalanced position to be in if you're leaning too far to one side or the other. I think that drawing or painting is just like any sort of language. We just have a culture that doesn't really value it, but just like everybody goes through preliminary training in English or whatever language they might grow up in their culture, or mathematics, it's the same thing. Anybody can learn how to draw. There's a formula to it. It's it's not mystical. It's very practical in regards to how to learn how to draw, and it's something that absolutely anybody can do if they devote themselves to learning it, much like probably anybody, if they really wanted to, could learn to speak Russian or Chinese or something like that. It would just take time, and there's a learning curve for sure. There are certainly some people that have more natural abilities or proclivities towards it. I've always kind of gravitated towards the art and drawing and painting, and it has always kind of made sense to me. And even now, of course, still feels very natural. It's not something that I need to think about too hard while I'm doing it. It just seems like something that I can do and kind of have always been able to do. And I do think that there are some people that are more geared that way, just like there's some people that are more geared towards mathematics than I might be, and it's just the way their brain works. So yeah, there's definitely people that are kind of more naturally talented in that regard, but I definitely think that with the right stimulus, it's something that any person could learn.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, like sometimes when I have these sort of visionary or mystical or psychedelic experiences, it almost feels like it's beyond art or beyond words or something, but it's always amazing when you see an artist or perhaps a band with their music or even a writer who very much so uses, like you're saying, the technical side of either writing or art or music, right? To translate that into something that is immediately recognizable, or at least even can help you to see things in a different light or from a different angle. That always kind of those two sides together, as you're mentioning, right? Like the astral or the spiritual and the technical together come
Right.
together very beautifully.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing because
And that's
yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it could be kind of, you could be lazy, like, oh, I had this, as you mentioned, maybe you have a visionary experience, and you mentioned how you immediately would like sketch, a portion of it, or you know, that way you don't forget it, right? But
Yeah.
it takes that work too, right? Like putting in the work instead of just saying, oh, it's beyond my ability to paint it or something, right? What?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of action and it takes a lot of effort to create works of art, especially the more complex and the more ambitious the work of art is, the longer it takes, the more effort it takes to create it. So,
Mhm.
you know, you don't make lazy masterpieces, as Salvador Dali said. You know,
Yeah, that's a good
but
one.
you were talking about like having like mystical psychedelic experiences. Like you're probably naturally primed to have those experiences. And I've met
Mhm.
people who, believe it or not, they take psychedelics and it's like nothing. You know,
Mm.
like nothing spiritual, nothing mystical at all. Like it's almost as if they don't have their third eye isn't open at all. You know, so it does take
Mm.
some preconditioning, and also I think that what you described previously, that's really the formula is you take somebody who is already fluent in whatever their craft is, and then the psychedelic or the mystical experience, it doesn't have to be through psychedelic, can
Mhm.
provide that door into higher inspiration. So you get people like
Mhm.
Aldous Huxley. I mean, he was already a great writer before he took psychedelics, and the
Mhm.
psychedelics just took him farther. You know, even I think even Terence McKenna was already a very gifted speaker and linguist before he got into the use as heavily as he did into psychedelics. Or you don't become Jimi Hendrix just by taking acid. You know, Jimi Hendrix could already
Right.
play guitar really well before taking acid, and that just kind of it helped him tune into something even higher.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I'm curious, like, so we're talking a bit about the psychedelic experience, but what like sort of spiritual practices do you have you done in the past, I suppose? And then perhaps do you have like a regular daily practice or anything along those lines that you do regularly? And then do you feel like having that, you know, because we mentioned how psychedelics can really tune you in and everything, but do you feel like having a daily practice or um, doing some, you know, it could be meditation or magic or things along these lines. Do you feel like that also helps you in your art? And if so, how do you think so?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think of having certainly a magic practice is basically the ability to alter your consciousness at will.
Hmm.
And that is a very useful skill to learn as an artist. So I'm more nowadays leaning towards the thelemic side of things. I guess I could consider myself a Thelemite and am involved in thelemic orders and things like that. And ceremonial magic has kind of taken a very big role in my life, as well as just sort of, I guess you could say, classical Hermetic Western occultism. And that kind of vein of the Western esoteric tradition has been becoming a stronger and stronger influence on my life and practice. So every day I do various practices related to that, like different rituals. And I do have a meditation practice as well. And occasionally I perform more complex rituals for different purposes. And astral projection is one of those things that I explore, as well as invocation. And
Hmm.
those two things are both really excellent tools for gaining artistic inspiration because, like I said before, it allows you to basically tap into altered state experiences at will without necessarily needing to take something.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you think it was that because you kind of mentioned earlier that you explored Buddhism and other practices. Was there anything specific, do you think, that drew you to thelema or thelemic practices, or was it just kind of like it just naturally ended up resonating with you and you kind of followed that doorway, I guess you would say, or path?
Well, Buddhism is subsumed by the Thelemic system.
Hmm.
So Buddhism is an aspect of Thelema and influenced it, as well as Buddhist practices like
Hmm.
meditation and pranayama and things like that.
Hmm.
I think that I explored the Eastern path and I still have tremendous respect for it. And I think that it's beautiful, and I still resonate with it very deeply.
Hmm.
I mean, I live in Bali, so I'm surrounded by Eastern spirituality here.
Hmm. Hmm.
What I appreciate about Thelema and the Western esoteric tradition and magic is that it contends with the material universe, whereas the goal of Buddhism is to release all attachment from the world. It's not
Hmm.
trying to get involved with the world. Whereas magic sees the world not as a problem, but like as a game to play,
Hmm.
you know?
Right, right.
And
Hmm.
and it also by virtue of being even the most devoted Thelemites are still in the world. You know, it's a householder's tradition, if you want to call it that.
Hmm.
Whereas to really be a Buddhist, I believe you kind of need to go the monk route and
Mm.
just completely renounce the world. So I guess that it's this interesting combination of attempting to seek enlightenment, but still attempting to play with and reconcile and balance the forces of world and existence that appeals to me about Thelema. And it's also like playing with nuclear power. I think that Thelema really taps into kind of like the strongest current that I've at least encountered in a spiritual tradition that reminds me of like strong acid trips or very powerful, you know, and it reminds me of that. Whereas there's something a little bit more, I guess you could say, gentle about Buddhism, but the perspective of Buddhism and other Eastern paths is that you have many, many lifetimes to achieve enlightenment.
Hmm.
Where I kind of feel like there's a energy behind Thelema that's kind of just, you know, balls to the wall. Like, let's do this. Let's go for enlightenment in one lifetime. Let's just completely blow the lid off this thing.
Right, right. And as you mentioned, it does incorporate a lot of the other tools, and I guess you would call it spiritual technology. Like it does incorporate like pranayama, kundalini, yoga, and if you read like Crowley's writings, I mean, it's like the fundamentals are pranayama and dharana. He goes through the sort of the Raja Yoga system, the Yoga Sutras,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very holistic, but at the same time, it's all these different sort of streams you can go off. There's different, you can go into like the Eastern practices. There's the, I mean, there's so many. There's the Grimoire kind of stuff, Enochian stuff, and
Right.
it's sort of like
Yeah.
this endless. I mean, it's sort of
Well,
it's like a tributary that sort of just goes off in all these different directions, but it still has a kind of a central focus at the same time.
right. I mean, that was Crowley's intention, was to create what was called scientific illuminism, where
Mm-hmm.
where the intention is to basically look at all the different practices from all the different world traditions
Mm-hmm.
that he had access to up until that point. And he spent a lot of time in India, and he spent time in China and different places learning about Buddhism and Hinduism and yoga and Taoism and all these different things. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea was to say, okay, this works and this works and this works and this works. What happens if we kind of put them all together and we just kind of fire on all cylinders and we use all the different tools that are given to us from all the different world cultures, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I'll say is like, I like the aesthetic of Thelema, and I like the kind of the mystery of it, and it has a sort of forbidden quality to it, and cool graphic design on the covers of the books, and interesting Egyptian prose. And I guess I also like it just as an artist. It inspires me. I resonate with it, with its atmosphere and things like that.
Oh, for sure. Cool geometries and different diagrams and stuff you see in a lot of the old texts are, awesome for sure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I noticed that you live in Bali, and I spent a month there. This is like, I think it was in 2019 before COVID. And I think you mentioned on a podcast, you've been there for a few years, right?
I
Yeah.
came here the first time 5 years ago, and
Oh,
I lived I lived here for 6 months 5 years ago, and then now I've been here solidly for about 3 years.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, I'm curious. I would like to hear your perspective because I've traveled pretty extensively as well, but there are certain places you go where you feel like a spiritual current. You feel like it's a special place, right? Like there's a special energy there. I mean, everywhere can be a place like that inherently if you make it, but um, there's definitely something unique about that place. So I'm kind of curious if you can share, why Bali is sort of special to you, what resonated with you there, and sort of like any spiritual currents and things along those lines that you came into contact with there.
Well, definitely. I mean, the Balinese spiritual culture is profound and very unique, and they're very dedicated to it, and it's very magical. They
Mm.
do practice magic here. They have their own forms of magic, but the religion that dominates the island is of its own accord magical. They do a lot of spiritual evocation, and they do a lot of spiritual banishment. And this is
Mm.
something that they do every day. They're an animistic culture, and they're very engaged with the spirits of their ancestors and of the kind of Hindu pantheon that is infused into their worldviews.
Mhm.
And they're genuinely spiritual. And I think a big thing too is that they practice what they preach. They're incredibly loving and generous and gentle and kind people,
Mm.
and whatever they're doing, it's working. Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of people. It's hard to say that about a lot of kind of religion, but whatever they're doing, it has a very positive effect on the people and how they live their lives and their communities and their families and their level of the relationship with the earth and the relationship with the spirit world.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone there is so, I don't know, you would say they're just so kind, right? Like, I
Yeah.
have just really good experiences with the people there, and it is cool. Like, you'll be walking through an area or driving, motorcycle through somewhere, and you'll see like the ceremony taking place, this sort of ancient looking ceremony, and they have those, I don't remember the name of it, but they have these like huge doll things. You know what I'm talking about? Those like
Hmm.
big, they're like these big figures, and I don't know, it just looks really interesting. I don't really know. I was only there a month, so I didn't really have a chance to explore it that much. But yeah, like you said, whatever they're doing, it's not only it seems like they're keeping this tradition alive, but it really does translate into how they behave and how they live, and just seems sort of like, I guess from a Western perspective, it can kind of seem like we compartmentalize a lot of things, right? Like there's the spiritual life
Right.
and then the mundane life, but there it definitely like streams all together for sure. What
Totally.
area in Bali are you in?
I live in Ubud,
Ah,
so it's
okay.
kind of the
Mhm.
spiritual tourism epicenter of Bali in a lot of
Right,
ways.
right. I wish I
But
spent more
currently,
time there.
given circumstances, there's not really any tourists so much here. Just
Yeah.
expats that live here.
Right, right, right. When I was there, it was definitely a lot of tourists, but there were a lot of like digital nomads, and I was in Canggu, and
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's like all expats over there, like tons of them.
yes. I
They
mean,
have.
I spend a good amount of time down there too. I kind
Mhm.
of, in some ways, split my time between the two places. And yeah, Canggu is a lot more. You don't even really necessarily feel like you're in Bali. I like living in
Mm.
Ubud because you still get a bit of the Bali flavor, but then there's also businesses and restaurants and cafes that cater to expats. But I've traveled pretty extensively around the island, and I love going to places that are not highly touristic, and really
Mhm.
getting a feel for the local culture, and that was kind of that's been less touched by tourism.
Oh, for sure. Like most foreigners, they either live in like Canggu and these other areas like that. But I did explore a little bit more of the island, and there's certain areas where you don't see any tourists or like foreigners or anything along those lines. And those are the more interesting places to me as well. It's just not,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot. It's a big island too, and most people they only really seem to spend. It's like a deep island. Like I think most people only ever tap into one
Hmm.
percent of it. So, um, I
For
really,
sure.
yeah, I wish I spent more time in Ubud though, because there's some cool stuff. I had a friend. that still lives out there, and he really likes a place called the Pyramids of Chi. Have you heard of this or been there before?
Sure, I live right around the corner from it, so I'm well aware of it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go there, but he was a big fan of that place. It looked pretty cool. I mean, the concept, I watched a video about it, looked pretty cool, but I didn't get a chance to experience it. But yeah, there are a lot of just different, like you said, different spiritual currents. And it's interesting. Ubud, it's like you have like yoga studios everywhere and like these Russian hippies and stuff, you know. It's kind of funny. Before I
Oh
went
my God, yeah.
to Bali, like the concept of a Russian hippie never really like I never thought about it. I mean, I'm sure they existed, but then you go to Bali and it's like all these Russians there doing yoga and meditating, and it's like, wow, this is
So many
unique.
Russian hippies.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, my girlfriend's Ukrainian, so I've thought about like if I were to learn, and I would almost learn Russian before I would learn Bahasa, which is the Indonesian language, just because there are so many Russian people here.
right, right, exactly. I ended up dating a Russian girl there too. Sort of like those are the people you come into contact with the most.
I guess that's just what you do in Bali, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
You
exactly.
do some yoga, you date a Russian girl, and you know. But,
Yeah, work on your laptop at a cafe. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
the thing. It's like when it comes to the spiritual currents that are here, I don't look to the expats for those spiritual currents. I mean, most
Mhm.
people here are kind of seekers, but I wouldn't really say that there are many people here that are more or less real, like legitimate lineage holders for real
Mhm.
spiritual currents. It's
Mhm.
more the locals that I'm inspired by, as well as I was really impressed when I first came here by the local artistry. They're some of the best artists in the world, and it is just so mythical here. It's so epic. You know, there's not a lot of
Yeah.
places that at least I've been to in the world like it, where everywhere you go, there are these epic stone carvings, and you know, it's like out of a dream or something.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, Bali is kind of one of those places. I feel like, I mean, to be honest, before I went there, I sort of wrote it off in my mind, like, ah, that's probably just some tourist trap, or, you know, I think I almost
Mm-hmm.
envisioned it like being kind of corny, or like, you know, sort of like, it's kind of like Hawaii. Like you have Waikiki, like the really tourist spot, but there's so many, like you can go to Maui,
Sure.
you can go to the rainforest in Maui and Hana, and you know, there's so much to
Mm-hmm.
explore in Hawaii, and Bali's definitely similar with that. Like, it's one of those places I feel like everyone should go at least once and check it out, you know. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, yeah. I noticed that you are a tattooist. I'm not sure if you're still doing that, but I did hear you mention you're interested in like some kind of unique projects, sort of like ritual tattoos. Do you have anything you can share about that?
Well, yeah, I haven't been tattooing lately,
Mm-hmm.
and part of that is just due to divergent interests, and part of that is due to circumstance. But I was doing ritual tattooing,
Mm.
and I was doing it here at first with a couple friends that would help to hold the ritual with me. And it was pretty powerful. We weren't really using any specific rituals of any kind of culture, but the idea was just to create a sacred intentional container for the
Mm-hmm.
tattoo that was a transformational experience. And I try to, when I get tattooed, to put that same amount of intention into it, because I do think that it can be something profound and that can have a magical effect on your life if you charge it with intention, and if you go into it with intention. That's not how most people in Western culture see tattooing now, but the history of tattooing is filled with people tattooing in that way. And actually, for most of human history, that's what tattooing was. It was always used to mark initiations and rites of passage, and it had an initiatory purpose, and it was also
Mm-hmm.
used for magic, and still in many places in the world is used for magic. Most people of Thailand are into these like talismanic tattoos that they do in Thailand, the Sakyant tattoos, which is like Buddhist magic.
Mm-hmm.
And even here in Indonesia, there's the Mentawai tribe that embraces tattooing in the same way. So for me, this is important. I'm an artist, so I want it to look good.
Hmm.
but I want the intention to be the deeper aspect of it and the more important aspect of it. It's not as much about what it looks like, although that is important. It's more about what you're putting into it and the reason why you're getting it.
Okay. So yeah, that's a good explanation. It's almost like you charge them like sigils, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of, I guess as you're explaining, it's kind of like that's what tattoos originally were, and it's sort of like bringing back that, because from like a Western perspective, you think about, you don't really, most people I don't think necessarily think about tattoos as sort of like a spiritual, charged with spiritual intent, or having this sort of shamanistic origin or meaning behind them, right? But I think it is cool that you're like bringing that back out to, what you're saying is probably normal for a lot of traditional cultures, but like for people from the West, it's probably a lot of people first time even hearing that perspective on tattoos, right? So,
Well, that's the thing. I mean, yes, that is the traditional view of tattooing. And like I said, that has been the view of tattooing for most of human history. And it's only in relatively recent history that the intentions of tattooing have changed, and that exists even within Western culture. There were, uh, you know, certain certain cultures like Celtic cultures have a sacred history of tattooing,
mhm.
and I think I mean it's definitely true of shamanistic and indigenous cultures, but I think it's true of Western cultures as well.
Yeah, for sure. Um, all right, yeah. So I browsed your website, and you have like these really cool looking courses, and I noticed a lot of them were obviously about like art, which is your specialty, and creativity. And so, for people who want to improve their creativity, um, or like their artwork in general, what sort of tips would you give them? I'm sure you offer a lot more in your courses, and I'm sure you go over that in quite detail there, but maybe for somebody who's sort of interested, what kind of advice or tips would you give them?
Hmm. Well, it is very personal and very unique to each person. And
Hmm.
anybody that subscribes for the Unleash Your Inner Artist course on my website, which is geared towards helping people activate their creativity, we do weekly sessions
Hmm.
as a group. And it's a fairly small group right now. So there's a lot of one on one time. And we go
Oh, cool.
into the specific goals and aspirations that each person has and try to strategize how to reach them. Really, the biggest thing that hinders most people when it comes to working on any kind of art form, whether it's drawing or painting or music or playing an instrument or writing poetry, is really just doing it.
Mm,
There could be a lot of fear about that. Most of that fear comes out of uh, trauma. Like
mm,
out of being told that they weren't a good artist and feeling ashamed when they try to do it and it doesn't match up to their standards. So to understand that that's a natural process, that there is a process in developing your creativity, and it takes time and it takes dedication. And some of the exercises that I provide in the courses get people creating on a daily basis right off the
mm,
bat. And if you cultivate it like a practice, something that you do every single day, and you cultivate discipline around it, eventually it just becomes something that you do. And there's going to be times where you like what you create, and there's going to be times where you don't. And that's just part of the process. So it's really about learning to be okay with that
mm.
rather than to freak out anytime you create something that isn't up to your standards. Because in some cases, even for me now, I create something that I don't like. Turns out other people love it. So it, it's just the fight with our inner critic is what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. So a lot of it kind of sounds like it's almost like you versus yourself in some ways, right? Like overcoming your own creative blocks, or as you mentioned, fears or judgment. So even the process of art and creativity itself is almost inherently spiritual in a way too, right? Like it's the sort of inner alchemy of
Absolutely.
finding your true inner artist, your true will, so to speak, right?
Those two things and also the concept of the true will are so interlinked with creativity.
Mm,
For example, with the Unleash Your Inner Artist course, the exercises that are done in that course are a lot of journaling exercises, and it's primarily geared toward people discovering kind of who they were when they were a kid, like who they are truly, and kind of like what really turns them on, like what makes them feel inspired and motivated, and just like lit up, like what makes you happy. A lot of people are really out of touch with that. And so discovering that stuff and getting in touch with it is really the same as getting in touch with your true will. And in my opinion, there are different facets of the same pursuit, which is to become fully aligned with the truest version of ourselves. And that's the place when you are, and I believe that creativity is a natural occurrence for human beings. That when you are in alignment with yourself and your natural essence, human beings are naturally creative, and it's not something that you need to force. And so people who are not creative, everybody is creative, but people that are not actively creative, it really comes out of the sort of imbalance or from being out of harmony with their true self.
And I think that, from my own observation, it's like sort of creating something, working on something, growing on certain things, and creating or expressing. It could be art, it could be music, it could be writing, it could be a podcast, it could be anything. But it's sort of, you feel when you're not creating or when you're not expressing your own inner visions or feelings or what have you, I feel like it's a lot harder to be content, like when you're actually putting something out there and putting yourself out there and going through the process that you talked about and creating something to the world, right? Sort of projecting it out into the world. I feel like without that, it almost feels like you're just, for me, this is my perspective. It almost feels like you're just sort of coasting by, or it's almost like you're sucking in content. It's like, I'm going to listen to this podcast and check out this thing. And there's a time for that as well, but it almost feels like sort of empty if you're not contributing, right? It's like being at a party and you just eat all the food and drink all the stuff and you never brought anything to the table. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. It's like an in-breath without the out-breath. I think they're both important. And just something to add is that it doesn't even have to be something that you share with the world. I feel like if you want to write poetry for yourself, or if you want to draw for yourself, that's a beautiful thing, and there doesn't need to be so much pressure around it. It's not every person's destiny or calling to necessarily become a master at their chosen craft. And it's okay to just write poetry because it feels good. And it's okay to just sing because it feels good, or to draw because it feels good, and to explore that because it's something that you enjoy doing, and because it's challenging and it helps you grow and it's developing new parts of yourself. So
yeah, I definitely resonate with that. Are there any new areas of like art that you're exploring? So we mentioned like you do your paintings and tattoos and stuff. Are there any new styles or any new things that you're working on, or is it sort of more like you're really honing in on what you're currently doing?
I've begun to create and release NFTs, and NFTs are crypto art. It's the ability to sell digital art for cryptocurrencies, and it's quite a big evolution in the current of art in general right now. So I have just begun starting to work with that, and I'm also working with virtual reality and creating art in VR, and doing immersive digital art and things like that, as well as painting, and I have all my other creative projects too, like podcasting and writing and things like that. So, and music, I'm always kind of doing something.
Yeah, keep yourself busy. The NFT thing sounds really interesting, and I've actually checked out your podcast. It's really good. I've heard you did one with Mitch Horowitz. That was
I did, yeah.
Yeah, that one was really good. I mean, I've heard him on a lot of other podcasts and like other shows and whatnot, but I think that was for anybody who's just wants to hear a good podcast, or maybe they know Mitch Horowitz already, read his books, or what have you. Like, listen to that one because that's a damn good podcast. You got him to really open up. I think the questions you asked were really good, and you got him to sort of I don't know. I think you got him to open up a lot and share a lot of
Thanks.
things that maybe opinions or experiences that I don't think other podcasts. He didn't really, go that deep, I guess you would say. So yeah, that was
Maybe
great.
it's just because I've been really familiar with his work already, or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, and so I could sort of, I know what he's good at. You know what I mean? Like, I know what he's an expert at, and wanted to talk to him about
Mm-hmm.
those things. But I just think
Mm-hmm.
it's like one of those things with podcasting, and I mean, you probably know this too. It's about making the other person feel really comfortable, and at ease, and so that they can open up. Like, that's one thing that Joe Rogan is just excellent at. It's just he can get anybody to talk to him. No matter how awkward that person might be. And Mitch is an amazing speaker also, and has a lot of experience doing that. And so it was really cool to interview him. I love his books and everything he does. So that was great.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, you have some really cool guests on your podcast, which is called the Quarantine Sessions. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was the situational title, and now I'm just stuck with it. So I don't know if
Yeah.
you can change a podcast name, but that's the title for now.
Yeah, yeah. You can find it on like YouTube and I'm pretty sure all the traditional platforms, right? Like Apple and iTunes and things like that, right?
It it's on everything. Yeah, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, it's on YouTube, pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found.
Hmm. To go back to what you're saying, the VR stuff, the VR art, I think it was on your YouTube channel where um, I think you have like the LBRP and you performed it
Yeah,
like a
right.
VR. Yeah. What's the deal? How'd you do that? That was really interesting. Like, what did you use? And because I think that something like that video could be really, really useful for people who I feel like maybe they read about a ritual in a book and they don't really,
Uh,
because you can read in a book and maybe misunderstand it or have trouble visualizing how to perform it. But then if you see the video that you made using VR, it's sort of like, oh, now it kind of clicks, right? Like it can sort of um,
yeah,
put a piece of the puzzle together, I feel like, for a lot of people. So, like,
right. That was the intention behind it. You
oh,
know,
that's,
um,
yeah. That's really cool.
yeah,
What's the,
that was done in a program called Tilt Brush. It's like made by Google, and it's a really fun creativity app for VR that allows you to draw in a 3D space, and there's all these cool light brushes that do all kinds of different effects.
oh,
And yeah, that was it was the idea. I mean, when you're in VR, you're in a universe of your own creation, which is what you access when you're doing a magic ritual like the LBRP anyway, right?
mm-hmm.
So it's like what is going on in your mind when you perform a ritual like the LBRP, you can actually externalize in a tangible way with VR. So like the minute I tried that app, I had the idea to try rituals in it, and I haven't done any quote unquote serious ritual in it, but I do think that it could be used for certain forms of magic, like to draw sigils and to meditate on sigils within VR and stuff like that. There's also, I don't have access to it because you need Steam VR to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but there was somebody that created a Golden Dawn Temple VR experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can do the neophyte initiation ritual of the Golden Dawn in VR using this app, which is pretty cool.
That's pretty epic, yeah. Because a lot of
It's
people they
pretty
don't
epic.
really, depending. Like, say you live in Bali, and it's like I doubt there's a Golden Dawn temple or
There's no Golden Dawn Temple in Bali.
yeah, exactly. I'm here in Korea and everything too, and obviously here as well. So I think personally, I think that a lot of people see these things as like opposed to each other, like spirituality and magic and technology, but I think that there's a way to blend them together where they sort of help each other, sort of like I was mentioning in your video, I mean, if somebody's having trouble visualizing, doing like drawing the pentagrams or what have you, that video can like instantly make things click. I feel like for a lot of people, and I do see the downside of like being dependent on it. It's like because I mean the whole point of a lot of these rituals is developing your psychic muscles, so to speak, right? Like your intuition.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
every time you perform a ritual like that and
Hmm.
you're using visualization, you're strengthening your light body, your astral body. So if you're
Hmm.
using VR as a crutch to do it,
Hmm.
you're not developing those essential faculties of visualization. So
Oh.
yeah, it's more of like an educational tool. I wouldn't ever see it being able to replace it necessarily, but like if I could get that app, which I can't unfortunately because I have a different VR device, I would
Hmm.
love to do the neophyte ritual for the Golden Dawn in
Hmm.
VR, and I think that especially with the way things are going with increased isolation and social distancing and traditional order structures kind of falling by the wayside and there being less accessibility in that regard,
Hmm.
VR might be one of the tools that allows people to still have initiatory experiences and still participate in mystery schools and traditions in the future.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think that, yeah, definitely. I think that they can actually be an aid, like you said. Relying on them to, you still have to develop your psychic muscles, and you still have to develop the skills and controlling energy, and using your intention. But at the same time, like you said, very educational, and they can be very. Um, I don't think they're like evil because I think a lot of people see it like sort of in a negative light, right? Like we mentioned, like you can be dependent on
Mhm.
the technology and stuff like that for sure, but they can also be used as tools, right? Something that we can actually use to, like you said, even experience a ritual that you can't even experience because you're in Bali, right? Like a ceremony or a
Mhm.
group setting. So yeah, I think it's really cool, and you should definitely put out some more stuff. I mean, that first, I don't know if you have any more. I think I only saw that LBRP one,
Yeah,
but
maybe that's the only one I made. Maybe I'll make some more ritual videos in the same way. Like maybe I'll do the lesser hexagram ritual or something in the same way so people can see it.
yeah, exactly. All right, are there any new like courses or artwork you have coming out, or any kind of things you want to discuss that people can check out, or even current stuff that maybe you want to discuss or plug?
Well, I just released that tarot card that I've
Hmm.
been working on. I created the Lovers card, and I'm working on a series of the 22 major arcana, which is a long project.
Hmm.
And so stay tuned for that. You can check out the first one I've already done. I would try to stay posted on my NFT releases if that's something that intrigues you.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think it's a pretty exciting field and new podcasts every week. Have some really good ones coming up. I mean, that's pretty much it. And I really would love for you to join, for whoever is listening,
Hmm.
my art community that I'm building in my online academy. And if you're inspired to really activate your creativity and to take the plunge into learning art, I would love to help guide you with that.
Oh, for sure. Sounds really cool too. You mentioned that the class is kind of like an ongoing thing, right? Like with weekly feedback and things along
Yeah,
those lines, right? That's cool because I think there are a lot
we
of,
we meet every week.
yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds like how you explain it, sort of you really tailor it to the individual and bringing out their own unique characteristics. Because there's a lot of courses out there where it's like you just download a video and that's it, and it seems sort of cookie cutter. But the way you're describing it, it sounds very dynamic, and yeah, you have these weekly, ongoing, sort of like a mentorship, even in a way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's like group coaching or group mentorship. I also work
Hmm.
with people individually. And so if anybody wanted to kind of dive even deeper, especially into the more technical aspects of drawing and painting,
Hmm.
then I also work with individuals. And I've worked with people who are not just visual artists. I've worked with blossoming DJs and I've worked with all kinds of creative types who are, who have been intending to blossom into their creativity and have had great success with it. And I really love doing it. And so I would love to do it even more coming into the future.
That's awesome. You get to see your children grow up, huh? You
Yeah.
start as stick figures, and pretty soon, pretty soon they have these amazing.
Unless they start getting more DJ gigs in Bali than I do, and then like, wait a minute.
That's funny. That's funny. All right. What's your website? Like, how can people find you? What's your website, or what's the easiest way to get a hold of you? Maybe your Instagram or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram, and I'm Kobrin on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter, and you can send me an email, and those are pretty much the ways to find me. The best kind of website that is everything is jakekobrinportal.com. That's like a landing page that has links to all the different things that I do, and my podcast, The Quarantine Sessions, can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and whatever the other podcast platforms are.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'll include all those links in the show notes. And so, yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. It was really a pleasure to talk with you. And I feel like I really learned a lot just about the process of art in general. And I hope that people who really want to develop their inner artist and they feel kind of called to this, I think that, you're providing the perfect platform for these people. And also with you're pushing the edges with the NFT art too. That sounds really cool. So yeah, really thanks.
And the first NFT I sold was a crypto sigil, and I'd like to do more magical kind of more crypto sigils and things like that in the future. And yeah, man, it's my pleasure to come on here and chat with you.
Oh, that's hilarious. So hold on one second. The first NFT you sold was actually the actual artwork was a sigil, a crypto sigil.
It's a crypto sigil. So
that's
I use blockchain cryptography to create like a random stream of numbers and created a sigil using that as well as other sigil techniques. And it's a sigil for prosperity in cryptocurrencies. And so that was the first NFT that I sold, was a crypto sigil for increasing abundance and prosperity for cryptocurrencies. And I hope whoever bought it, that it does serve them that way.
Oh,
it was fun to make also.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's almost like meta, like you sell the actual crypto sigil and you're working in the crypto platform. It's very I think it's pretty trippy. It's really cool to hear that. So
yeah,
sure. All right, cool. Yeah, I think I've actually got to head out here, but y'all have this up later today, and until next time.
Awesome, thanks.